How do you design a gender and equity responsive budget to address the needs of men, women, boys, girls, and other marginalized groups? The budget cycle is a key entry point. So today I'm going to take you through how you can embed gender responsive budgeting into the main framework of the budget cycle. Gender responsive budgeting is provided for under the Public Finance Management Act. All ministries, agencies, and local governments are required to produce certificate of compliance to ensure that their budgets are gender and equity responsive. When we talk about gender and equity responsiveness, what are we talking about? We're not talking about women being given money. We are talking about activities in the budget that address mainstream concerns of the citizens. Now, what do we mean when we talk about gender and equity responsive budget? We are talking about allocating resources with an extra eye on the burden that girls, boys, women, and men face in our districts. A gender and equity responsive budget will try to identify what limits boys and girls to access, control, own, benefit from the projects that are implemented by government. That is basically what we mean by gender responsive budgeting. It must improve access to services by girls, boys, and women. It must improve the benefits and or received by boys, girls, and women. It also must provide for their rights, and they must participate in the process of making that budget. So that's what we mean by gender responsive budgeting, which is equitable. Now, it is important that we look at from which framework we derive gender responsive budgeting. The Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development is a key driver of a gender responsive and equitable budgeting. They have specific outcomes that include activities that respond to the marginalized group. One, child protection through information and advocacy. Allocation for that activity makes your budget gender responsive. So what are some of the outcomes as a leader you should look out for? When you do gender and equity responsive budgeting in your district or in your municipality, one, you empower the communities and increase their involvement and participation in the development process. You improve the environment for employment and labor productivity. You enable the vulnerable and marginalized persons to get protections and support for their livelihoods. These are key district outcomes which you should capture in your budgets when you're making your budget gender responsive. And remember, when these issues are not reflected in the budgets of the ministries, agencies, and local governments, they shall not be issued with certificate of compliance. So, for instance, there are certain targets you would want to meet in order to comply. What percentage of men, women, boys, and girls access direct livelihood services from your district? What percentage are targeted by your budgets from the PWDs, from the elderly, in terms of livelihood support. So these are some of the indicators you should work with your executive committee and your councils to discuss and clearly indicate them in your budgets. Now, when you do gender responsive budgeting, there are a lot of benefits you get as a district or a government agency. One, it improves the efficiency by ensuring expenditures benefit those who need it most. And in your district, the people I've identified are the people who need a gender responsive budget. It improves on the monitoring by helping government know that the services are reaching the people. The Wananchi will give you feedback. It also helps in tracking implementation and also fighting corruption. Because when you support the weak, they're able to give feedback in their community meetings. So it improves transparency and accountability. Gender responsive budget guarantees democratic governance, because making a gender responsive budget requires participation. So it is important that you recognize these benefits when you do your budgeting. Now, what are some of the important concepts we should know? How do you make your budget gender responsive? One, make sure that your expenditures target gender-based government activities, even in your own district. How do you empower the women civil servants to ensure that they deliver the services? Two, a gender responsive budget must provide for equal employment opportunities in their expenditures by uplifting the girls, by uplifting the boys. Then three, all your budget items in all sectors should have provision for mainstreaming gender. When you're constructing a road, how does your road help that girl child to spend little time collecting water from the village wells? When you are constructing a health center, is there a section for youth-friendly services? This is what we are talking about, gender-responsive budgeting. So it is important that you embed some of these gender initiatives into your budget. And here you have the power, because when you are given envelopes, resource envelopes, you are supposed to sit down with your councillors and agree on the most pressing issues. Most of our leaders think of constructing a community hall, a classroom block. But when you are doing even construction of a classroom block, you have to disaggregate how will it benefit the girls? How will it benefit the boys? So these are some of the important issues you should address. So how do you analyze problems and propose solutions? One, understand the problem that women face, that the girls face, that the boys face in your community. For instance, sexual reproductive information is lacking in the villages. How do you allocate funds in the budget to facilitate advocates to come into your sub-county, into your parishes, to explain to the little girls why teenage pregnancy is bad? During this lockdown, statistics about teenage pregnancy is very, very scary. In one district, 6,000 girls got pregnant, teenagers. In another one, 1,000. Now, these are the problems that you require to address through a gender-responsive budgeting. So it is important that we look at some of the sectors where gender-responsive budgeting is a necessity. For instance, in the education sector, low and inequitable access to pre-primary education. In your district, how many children between 3 to 5 years have access to infant education, nurseries? Remember, the government policy says that early childhood education is a preserve of the private sector. But you as a leader, how are you contributing to ensure that you make budgets that are equity responsive to address the issue of poor access to pre-primary education? Then there is low primary net enrollment rates. You will discover that from the EMIS data from the Ministry of Education, the special needs, children with special needs are 172,846, which is 29% of persons with disability, age 6 to 12. But how many of those access education? Physical inaccessibility of available primary school facilities. You find that in a primary school, it is a storied building there. The staircases don't make provision for disabled people, so they cannot access. So this is the equity we are talking about. Teachers, they send funds for recruitment of teachers in your district, and you need special needs education teachers and assistive devices. But where is it provided for in the budget? And you can exploit the budget cycle and insert this. Gender disparity in primary school enrollment. You'll discover that in the villages in your district, boys access education more than girls. What can you do through gender responsive and equitable budgeting to ensure that you bring the numbers of girls up? All these ones are before you in your councils. Please think about that. Then performance disparities between rural and urban, even between towns in your district and the rural areas. You'll realize that in the PLE performances, the last one, the trading centers, best schools perform better than the schools deeper in the villages. So how do you pull the schools in remote areas in your district so that they improve their performances and restore parity? That is what we call gender and equity responsive budgeting. Then you can talk about sanitation facilities in schools. You find that teachers are sharing toilets with girls. As a district chairman, as a sub-county chairman, is it right, really? So you have huge opportunities to make budget provisions to restore equity and have a gender-responsive budget. Then there's sexual violence in schools. I told you about girls getting pregnant. There's information that during the PLE of 2018, a total of 6 girls in one school in Masindi were expecting. Over 10 girls delivered during PLE examination. That one should send a signal to you that there's something not right in terms of budgeting. So it is important that we identify these areas in the education sector, use the resources that has been allocated to us, and address this. Then there is disparity in our access to secondary education. In some sub-counties, in some districts, there are no USC secondary schools. So you find the boys walk longer distance and access school in the neighboring sub-county. The girls stay home. As a district chairman, this is a serious issue you must address. And you can only address such challenges using gender and equity responsive lenses. I want to give you another example in the health sector. There is huge disparity in terms of services to prevent maternal mortality. You're constructing a road, mothers are dying during childbirth. How do you address this? You might say that roads are used by everybody, but the mothers have more needs. For them to be alive, they must deliver in a safe and well-provided environment. High infant and child mortality from diseases that can be prevented, like malaria. Government has tried, but what is your contribution at your level? Ministry of Health is always distributing mosquito nets, but you as a chairman of a district or a sub-county, you need to make an input in your budget to supplement the efforts of sub-county, of the government. Then there is limited youth-friendly services. I've talked about that. Then there is limited access and usage of family planning. People don't understand and appreciate the importance of family planning. No wonder the country achieves high economic growth, but because of exponential population growth, the benefits of the economic growth is eroded. You find a family of 15. How do you pay school fees? So family planning is important to control population explosion And mark you, our natural resources are limited. The land is not expanding. So the more you produce, the more you fragment the land. So family planning has economic sense in that it ensures that you use the available resources optimally to change the life of the population. So leaders must encourage budgeting for family planning. Then the other issue under health is malnutrition. You'll find that children in your districts are anemic. They don't even have dietary variety that should support the health of a young person. They don't have access to zinc, which produces iron to make the body strong. So challenges like this need you to address them head on. Don't wait for central government. Your local revenue is there. Make provisions to address the issue of anemia, the issue of malnutrition, the issue of stunted growth among children, however little it is. Now, for instance, let's look at the system of budgeting. We have the program-based budgeting system. This is a huge opportunity, if you understand the process, to make provisions for gender-responsive budgeting. Our budget theme for this year is industrialization, inclusive growth, and wealth creation. Now, my interest is on inclusive growth. Inclusive growth is talking about boys, girls, the poor, women who are marginalized. How is your district implementing this budget theme? So it is important that your budget strategy, your estimates and annual plan in the program-based budgeting system must link gender-responsive outputs to gender strategic objectives. The budget, therefore, should be results-based and performance-driven. We must know how has your budget improved the quality of life of women, girls and boys. So the accounting officers, according to the law, are required to align their budgets to reflect the NDP3, to reflect the Public Finance and Management Act requirement that all your budgets must be gender responsive, must also be equity responsive. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you, gender responsive budgeting work is about politics. It's about negotiation. You must be a good advocate. You must be a good negotiator. There's overwhelming pressure. The resources are not enough, but how skillful are you in negotiation? How skillful are you in advocacy? Combine with CSOs to give you research information so that gender and equity responsive budgets are a common feature of your budget every year from now that you have understood what gender responsive budgeting is. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for listening to me. Have a great day.